Hey, fifth graders, we're going to continue to work on rounding decimals along with adding and subtracting. They kind of all go hand in hand. Rounding is a really good way to kind of double check your work or get a good estimate. And then we can also work on adding and subtracting to getting an exact answer. So I hope you have your math notebooks ready to go. And I want to start with number 4 here as a bit of a warm up. So we're going to go through rounding to a whole number, rounding to a tenth, a hundredth, and continuing on to use this with addition today. So I'm going to change my pen color real quick. All right, so our first one says, round to the nearest whole number. When it says the nearest whole number, our nearest whole number is going to be our ones. So we have right here, our ones place is nearest to our decimal. It's not round to the nearest 10 or round to the nearest 100 or round to the nearest tenth. Our nearest whole number will always be in our ones place here, just because it's closest to the decimal, and all we're really doing is looking at those decimals to get it close to a whole number. So if I look at my ones here, I need to go over to my decimal, and I'm going to ask myself what it is closer to. I really like using the number line for this. And if I want to think about this, I have 0 and I have 1. If I want to look at my tenths position here, I can either look at it as 75, or if I'm going to look at just my 7/10ths, for me, I like to look at this as 75. I'm thinking to myself 0 and 1 or and 75/100ths. I know that 0.5 or 5/10 would be about right here. And 75/100ths would be about right here. I know that's closer to 1 than it is to 0. So it's closer to 1 whole, so I'm going to have to round up here. So it's closer to 32 than it is to 31. And I know that because my 75/100ths is closer to 1 than 0. So it moves this 1 on up. Same thing, go to the right, look next door, 5 or more, up the score. So let's do the next one here. 6 and 49/100ths. So again, closest whole number would be my ones place here, my 6. I go right. I only have 4/10ths here. Ooh, so 4, I know that makes me round down. So again, if I'm thinking on my number line, I know that 5/10ths is half. And this is less than 5/10ths. Barely, 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 barely. It's right here. Even closer than that if I could get exact, but 49/100ths should be just a little bit less. So it's actually closer to 0 than it is to a whole, or it's less than 5/10ths here, so it needs to round down. So that 49/100ths doesn't really count. It's too little to move it up. So this would round down to 6. Now let's look at what we would do on number 7. If we have 97/100ths and it says round to the nearest whole number, we don't have a whole number yet. We have 0 right now. So I need to think to myself, okay, 97/100ths, that's really close to a whole. And if you need to use your number line, you can, but hopefully we can envision in our head, 97/100ths is only 3/100ths away from a whole. If I go to where my whole number would be, in this case it's a 0, I look right, that 9 is going to round it up. So in this case, it's just going to round up to 1 whole. I don't need to add any decimals to any of these. I don't need to say and 0/100ths. I don't need to say and 0/10ths. I don't need to add any of these because it says the nearest whole number. If it's a whole number, it doesn't have decimals at the end. So again, it's just rounding to the nearest whole number. Let's do our last one is number 6, because this one's a little bit trickier. I have 11 5/10. What's tricky about this one is if I was to put it on a number line, my 5/10 would fall right in the middle, exactly at half. So at this point, you might ask yourself, okay, well, do I round it up or do I round it down? Well, if you remember, once it hits 5/10, it rounds up. Anything 5 or more rounds up. So what's crazy here is if we look at number 5, 6 and 49/100ths. This is 1/100th away from being 5/10, but it's not quite there yet. The second it hits 5/10, just like it is with any other rounding, once it hits 5, you end up rounding up. So in this case, my 5/10 would round it up to 12. So hopefully you're able to take some notes on that part. I know it's very familiar with what we did yesterday, but I just wanted to do a little quick review. Let's do a couple of hundredths and tenths now. We know our nearest whole number has no decimals. It's a whole number, it's rounded up, but now our hundredths and tenths, things are gonna mix up a little bit. So we are now looking at our hundredths. So what we have to be very, very conscious of here is our place value. The nearest whole number, well, we know that's in the ones place. The nearest hundredth, what I love to do is I like to either box or underline the number I'm looking at and then draw my little arrows so that I can keep it really clean and organized. So in your notebook, why don't you write number 10 out? 4 and 51 thousandths. Remember, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So I know I'm working in my hundredths, so I'm going to underline my hundredths. If you round it to the nearest hundredth, your number needs to stop there. We don't go on to the thousandths. We need to, whatever it's asking you to round to, is where your place value needs to stop. So I'll look at it here and I'll say 51 hundredths. I'm looking at my 5 here because that's my hundredths place value. I'm going to go to my right. Well, 1 is real small. 1 does not round me up at all. He keeps me right where I am. So I would now have 4 and 5 hundredths. It's almost as if that little 1/1000th is just disappearing at this point. We're rounding it to our nearest hundredth. We're like, hey, this 1,000th, he doesn't do anything. Get rid of it. So let's now look at one that might round up. Let's go to number 11 here. 16 and 686 thousandths. Again, I'm working my hundredths, so I need to underline my hundredths place. I know that's where I'm working. And if you want to pause and try this one on your own, and then we can talk about it, that would be awesome. So again, I highlight my hundredths. I always go to the place value to the right of it. In this case, I have 6 thousandths. Think to yourself, is 6 going to send us up or down? And we know that 5 or more, we need to round up. So again, anything to the left of the place value will stay the same. My 16 stays the same. My 6/10 stays the same. The only thing I'm changing in this case is my hundredths. So this is my hundredths right here, the next place value. So that's the one where I'm stopping, and that's the one that's rounded. Everything else before it stays the same. I know that in this case, my 6 is large. It rounds my 8 up to 9. So you're only changing the hundredths place, and you're changing it based upon what's to the right of it. Just like you did with whole numbers. Now let's try it with tenths really quick. Same thing here. You're only rounding the place value they ask you to round, and you're looking to the right to do so. So let's just start with number 16. Why don't you pause this really quick, try it on your own, rounding to the nearest tenth. And then we'll come back together in just a second. So hopefully you were able to pause it. Nearest tenth, I need to identify what place value we're rounding to. So my tenths are right here. I have 1/10. I need to look to the right. Those 6/100ths are going to round up. Again, another way to look at this is 16 closer to 10 or closer to 20? Well, we know it's closer to 20, so it will round up. Or a 6 closer to 1 or 10, same thing. So I know that I need to stop in my tenths place because that's what I'm rounding it to. So 51 and 2/10. I have to stop there. I know I round up because I see a 6. I want to look at 21 really quick though, because 21's a little bit trickier. You will notice sometimes you round it to the tenths place, but they give you a lot of numbers afterwards. You still stop at the tenths. It doesn't matter if there's hundredths or thousandths, you still stop at the tenths place. So I'm still gonna go here, identify my tenths place, which in this case is a 1. Look to the right. Whatever's in the thousands place at this point, I'm not looking at it. I'm just gonna go to the right. I'm gonna go to the hundredths place. And again, if you wanna look at this as 82, that works. And ask yourself, is 82 closer to 0 or is it closer to 100? And hopefully we know that it's definitely closer to 100. It'd be somewhere right about here, maybe a little bit closer. Or again, I know that my 8, 5 or more up the score, my 8 would send this up to 2/10. So there's a couple different ways you can look at it. If you like to make your number line, that works. If you like to use the rule of 5 or more up the score. But either way, the big focus today is you are stopping at whatever place value they're telling you to round to. And there will sometimes be, such as 21, numbers beyond that place value. But we are only rounding the tenths place or the hundredths place or the nearest number. So you really have to be conscious of which place value it's asking you to round to. Today, I also want to kind of go back and double check real quick. When we are adding, I want us to go here, go back a little bit. I want us to make sure we are really working on adding up our decimals all aligned. And so I just want to pull out number 3 really quick. I want to make sure that we are understanding that all of our decimals need to be lined up when we are adding or subtracting. So if we were given 5 and 75/100ths plus 5 and 4/10ths, and 5 and 25/100ths, and 5 and 17/100ths, and 5 and 6/10ths. Big, huge problem here. I want us to remember that if we're working with tenths, hundredths, whole numbers, we need to use our 0 as our place value holder. So we need to make sure our decimals are always lined up on top of each other. And if you need to throw in an extra 0 as a place value holder, that's fine. But no matter what, I'm not going to ever add 5 and 75/100ths plus 5 and 4/10ths without them being on top of each other. Because now, if I do it this way and I look at my decimal, that's actually become 54/100ths now, because it's after my decimal in the first problem. So just make sure as you guys are going through this today, because we're gonna have a little bit of both, that you are lining everything up and using your 0s as needed. Because we know that 5 and 40/100ths is the same as 5 and 4/10ths, because it's just saying 5 and 4/10ths and 0/100ths, exactly the same thing, but that 0 helps us keep our place value. So I just wanted to throw that in there real quick to help you keep in mind today when you're adding and subtracting, to make sure you line them up and use those 0s as needed. If I go up to number 2, number 2 is a good example as well. Same thing. If our largest place value we're working up to in this is in the thousandths, like they are here, then you're just gonna have to put in zeros at the end of it. Because I know that 1 in 5/10 is the same as 1 in 500 thousandths, or 1 in 5/10, 0 hundredths, 0 thousandths. So it's really the same thing. And when you do this, you might have to borrow if you're subtracting, but it's the same exact thing as long as your decimals are lined up. It's the same as any other addition or subtraction problem. So kind of keep that in mind as you go through our review today. And keep also just make sure you focus on the decimal place value and which place value it is talking about today.